Hi, everyone. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Jimmy Doyle. I'm the Director of Business Development with Luminate, and today I'm going to take you through our streaming viewership platform. Streaming Viewership M tracks minutes watched for all of the major streaming services in the US. We'll get into all the nitty-gritty of how the product works, how we're getting the data together, uh, how all of that's put together. It looks like I was backlit. So, a little bit of movie magic happening right before your eyes, right behind me. But we'll go ahead. And before I dig into how we do all of this, how we put everything together, I just want to show you some data and actually get you right into the platform. So let me go ahead and pull up some data. So the Olympics just happened. There was a lot of really interesting data around Peacock for the Olympics. Largely what we track is streaming originals. So we're not going to be tracking how the actual sports content on Peacock performed. But what's frankly more important to Peacock and NBC and what they're trying to do with the Olympics is they want that viewership at the Olympics, but they really want people to stick with the platform after the Olympics are over. So we wanted to look at some of the data around how their titles have performed during this Olympic period. And then we'll actually be releasing a report about this week. It's a fantastic report in our Streaming Watch newsletter, definitely something worth subscribing to. It's a great report that largely I'm just ripping off from my colleague Keelan Brown, and we'll take you through some of that data right now. So, and as you have any questions, please just throw them in the chat, and then our team will be answering questions, and we'll also get to some of those at the end as well. So this is just a control case. This is not a show on Peacock, but this is the Challenge All-Stars. This is what a typical unscripted competition series looks like. You're going to see big pops for each week of the release, and then you're going to see a pretty fast decay rate after the series finale. That's really typical. People watch the show, and then the show's over and they stop watching. That's very normal for a TV show. What's abnormal is the data that we see here for Love Island USA. So Love Island USA is on Peacock. This show ended on July 21st and 22nd, and you will see a little bit of spike in data right there. You'll see a bigger spike on July 8th. That's because there was a very dramatic episode, according to one of my colleagues. But on July 22nd, we see that pop for the finale, but we don't see that significant decay because that next 2 weeks is the Olympics, and we see it holding really, really, really nicely. This is very atypical for an unscripted television show to hold like that. That is specifically because people are joining the platform, tuning in, checking out the show after that, during that Olympic period. And we can see that with a few of their other shows. So Those About to Die, this was the show that Peacock was really pushing during the Olympics. If you were watching any of the Olympics, you probably saw an ad for this show. So we see in the initial release right before the Olympics, July 21st, 22nd, 23rd, they had a big pop of viewership. That's very typical when a show's initially released. But then we see these kind of rolling holds over the weekend of the 27th, 28th, and then the following August 3rd and 4th. That's really nice for Peacock. They're seeing people still really engage with the show. They're not seeing a really fast decay with the title. That's because there are people coming into the platform for the Olympics. And we'll also see that with shows that they already had on the platform. So Twisted Metal actually came out last summer. What we're looking at right now is year-to-date data for Twisted Metal. And what's interesting is we'll see two big spikes in the data. We're looking at weekly level data right now. And in week 3, we'll see a really big spike. That's when Peacock had the exclusive playoff game for the NFL with the Chiefs. Really big game for them, brought a lot of people into the platform, and then people were going and finding other titles within the Peacock platform when they went and watched that playoff game. So we see a really big spike there. We see that for a lot of Peacock shows. And then you also see this in weeks 30, 31, 32. That's when people are coming in, watching the Olympics, and we're seeing that really big increase in viewership. So it really did have an effect on the viewership for Peacock, having those Olympics. That's expected, but if I'm an NBC executive, this is really positive to see, and it shows that that sports content is something that's going to bring people into the platform and get them to try out other titles within the platform, which is really important, especially on a largely ad-supported platform like Peacock. So you've seen a little bit of this data. You're probably like, what is this data? How does it work? How do I use this platform? All of these questions will be answered. So let me go ahead and actually get into the deck and explain a little bit more of how we're putting this data together, and just what Luminate is. So a little bit of background on Luminate as a company as a whole. We are the source of truth for the music industry. We provide all the data that powers the Billboard chart. So we have a lot of history in terms of measurement and consumption data. We also have a great film and TV business where we are the world-class metadata provider for the film and TV industry, tracking things like budgets and ratings, DEI data, industry contact information. And we've been doing that for 25 years. So we had this great legacy of film and TV metadata and then consumption data on the music side. So it made a lot of sense for us to get into consumption on the film and television side. We also have this, we're ultimately a tech company, and we have this amazing data science team that is able to take all these various different data sources, transform them, put them into really easily digestible information for our clients. And that's what you'll see really the effect of when we get into the platform. So the big problem that we saw in the industry was a big issue of information asymmetry. So as we all know, the streamers have all of this data. They can see very granular information on how their shows are performing, but anyone who works with them doesn't have that information. So if you produce a show for a streamer, you represent someone who produces a show for a streamer, even if you own your own streamer, but then you license a title to a different streamer, you have no data on how that title's performing. So it's really difficult then when we're negotiating with that platform. We're trying to get a renewal for a second season. We're trying to understand how we perform. It's really difficult to understand those things without having access to the data. And what's great about Luminate's platform is we're able to show all of the streamers together, get comparative information. We can compare titles from Netflix and Disney Plus and see the full scope of sci-fi fantasy titles, things like that. And we can get really specific about how these titles are performing in a real apples to apples setting where we're looking at all of the data. And this is why we have streamers that we track. They're using this data to see how other titles are performing, whether it's competitive titles or things that they've put onto other platforms. So it's a really important data set to have. As far as how we're doing it, the title of the product is Streaming Viewership M. That M stands for modeled. This is a modeled data set, just like every other viewership data set for streaming in the business. And also, for that matter, all the linear data in the business has always been a modeled data set. So the way that we're actually doing that is we have access to a panel of 2.5 million connected televisions. We're taking the data from those 2.5 million connected TVs. We're able to see everything that's coming across the screen level of those TVs, match it to an image in an image database, and we're able to say, okay, this person watched this many seconds of Ted Lasso season 2, episode 3. And then our data science team is extrapolating that for the entire United States. So then we're taking that and putting it toward the entire US. We're also using a few other additional data sets to help model the data and understand directional information around the data. So we have proprietary data from our parent company, Penske Media, and data on their 370 million monthly active users. We also track any public title level content engagement data. And then, of course, we're in talks with all the major streamers in terms of how we can make sure this data is more accurate. We also have metadata from our own metadata, which is our best-in-class metadata, which is great so we can actually understand what this data means. It's one thing to know how a title is performing, but to be able to understand how it's performing against other titles within a similar genre with certain talent, all of that's really important, which is why attaching that metadata becomes so valuable. As far as what we track, we cover all the major streaming platforms. We don't comprehensively track FAST, so free ad-supported streaming television like Tubi, Pluto, things like that. But we do often have some of their original titles within the platform, and you will see those chart from time to time. So we'll see these are the platforms we cover. We also are able to return results really quickly. So that's one of the really amazing things that we can do is we're returning results 24 hours after the week's completion. So the week ends for us, we measure the week from Friday to Thursday, and then that following Friday, we'll have that week's data. So like this Friday, we'll have data for how titles performed this past week, which is really, really, really fast turnaround for streaming data and allows us to really see how things are happening in real time. We also have historical data dating back to January 1st, 2022. Largely what we track is original titles. So these are titles that are original to a streaming service, but we also do track now a lot of acquired titles. So acquired titles are going to be things that start on linear television and then move to streaming. That'll also be older titles, older movies that are now on a streaming service. We brought in over 3,000 acquired titles into the platform, and that's something that we're continually bringing in.
And Jimmy, I would just add that if somebody's using a competitor's streaming service, they're waiting 10 to 30 days for that measurement to come in.
Absolutely. We're really the fastest measurement on the market for streaming viewership data. Most places are taking, as Mark said, 10 to 30 days to bring in that data. So let me go ahead and get into the good stuff now and actually take you into the platform itself. So when we first get into the platform, this is the homepage of the platform. We're seeing it says current week partial. So we're actually seeing data up to yesterday. So we're right in the middle of our current week right now, but we can see how titles are performing as this chart's building. Ultimately, this is the building blocks for the top 10 that we deliver to Variety every week, and you'll see publicly in Variety. We chart the top 50. We have data on a lot more than the top 50, so we can certainly go a lot deeper than that. But let me go ahead and go to last week and go to a completed chart week so we can see kind of a full week's worth of data, finalized chart. And I'll pull up our movie chart first. I'll certainly get into television in just a moment. But we'll see titles here on our movie chart, how they performed. So what we'll see here is the minutes watched for this week in question. We'll also see the minutes watched for that previous week, and then the percent change. So we'll see, you know, how a title is kind of having that decay after release. We can also click in on any of these titles and actually see more of the metadata around a title, things like its genre, the companies that produced it. We'll see how it performed on the chart each week. And we also have this views metric here. So views is going to mean it's not unique views. It's going to be an average viewership metric, meaning minutes watched divided by the runtime equals views. What this is really useful for is it helps us cut through some of the noise around when a title's a lot longer. Obviously, that title could have more minutes watched, but that doesn't mean more people are necessarily watching it. So Descendants and Rebel Moon Part 2 are a really good example here. We can see Rebel Moon Part 2, both Rebel Moons are very, very, very long films. Descendants is a much shorter title. And so we'll see Rebel Moon Part 2 has a little over 700,000 views. But then Descendants, even though it's one chart position lower, it has less minutes watched for last week. We'll see it as 1.3 million views. So more people are likely actually seeing that, or in the case of Descendants, that's a children's title. So there's a chance more children are rewatching that movie over and over. But it's being watched more often than Rebel Moon. But Rebel Moon has more minutes because it's a longer title. So it helps us cut through that noise and understand that data a little more deeply. We can also see different kind of trends here. Something that's just interesting within the movie chart for last week that I think is worth calling out, and this is something that got a lot of news pickup, is Hillbilly Elegy. Really, this came out in 2020 and then boosted way up in terms of viewership. And so we'll see right now it's number 11 on our chart, but last week it was number 2 on our movie chart. This is, you know, based on J.D. Vance's book. So when he became the running mate for former President Trump, we see a really big increase. So it was sitting, you know, somewhere in the 200s on our movie chart. And then you'll see as we get closer, it starts to move up. And then over the last few weeks, it's been in the top 10 in our chart. So it really saw this massive boost in viewership. This is something we also saw with Veep the weekend that Kamala Harris was announced as running at the top of the ticket for president. So it's something that's very interesting there. So let me go ahead and take us into the TV chart, and we'll look a bit more deeply at a specific show. So similar data that we'll see here. For most shows, we don't have views populated yet. We will have it for some shows right now, but we'll be bringing in more of that views data for television over the coming months. Let me go ahead and actually click in on Presumed Innocent so we can get a little bit more specific data around this title. So we'll see the minutes watched for this period in question, the activity to date on the title as well. When we're looking at this, sometimes when we get in the billions, I think that's a little hard for my little brain to wrap around. So sometimes going into the hours view is a little better, and I can actually look at this at an hourly level. We'll keep it impressive though, and we'll stick to minutes for now. So we can look at the trends within that week period, but I want to actually look a little bit deeper. So I'll go into our calendar tool and I'll navigate to the first 12 weeks of activity because I want to see from release how this title performed. So this is a similar view to what we saw when I was showing you some data at the beginning of this demo. But right now we're looking at daily level data. Perhaps I want to look at this at a weekly level to just see it at that more macro view. This is also something within our platform. What's awesome is I can export this data to CSV. So I can export this daily level data right within the platform and then have that internally, compare it to other data sets that I might already have access to internally. We can also break this down at an episodic level. So we can get really specific about how this title performed at an episodic level. And we'll see it here, this title performed really well, is the story that I'm going to show you. You can see it a lot more, less even here in this pie chart. You see every piece of the pie is fairly equal. That's a positive sign for streaming shows. Sometimes people will sample the first episode and then really fall off very quickly. But you can see it even more starkly in the episode trends, which I'll actually move over to a daily level. And here we can really see the story with Presumed Innocent. We'll see its premiere. It does okay viewership with those first 2 episodes that were released at the same time. You'll see that those episodes are holding really well week over week. And as each episode's released, they're gaining in viewership. That's a really, really positive story to be gaining in viewership that much. And then, of course, this is a show that has, a big twisty, buzzy ending. People want to talk about it. It's a little water cooler. So we see this huge finale and this huge viewership on those first 2 days for the finale. So even though maybe people started watching in the 3rd episode, the 4th episode, and they started catching up that 3rd or 4th week, a lot of people made a point to tune into that finale right at the end of the show. So that's really, really, really a strong performance for the show. This is exactly what you'd want to see if you're looking at the show. And it is one of Apple's biggest shows of the year. So this is something that had a really nice viewership story. One other thing that's awesome just about the Luminate platform is this episodic data. I can also export this. So I can export daily level episodic data, which is a fantastic amount of granularity if we want to really dig into this data. So maybe we want to look at things at a more macro level, and we can actually go into our streamer level. So we can look at any of the streamers that we track at that larger kind of sky view level. So let me go ahead and pull up Disney. And right now we're still in that current week time frame, but I actually want to navigate back and look at something a little bit broader. So we'll look at their year-to-date data for Disney Plus. And when I get here, I can scroll down and see the content share. So we'll see a top 20 for this specific streamer in the time period I'm looking at. So right now I'm looking at year-to-date for Disney Plus, and we're able to see what are those top 20 titles for them. So something that's interesting here is Percy Jackson. This premiered in December, and this is by far the biggest hit right now on the platform. The Acolyte might beat it out, but we can see kind of in the episodic data, there's a bit of a different story there. So The Acolyte, we wrote about this in our Streaming Watch newsletter as well, but The Acolyte had a really big premiere. It's the biggest single episode on Disney Plus year to date. But you'll see a lot of these Percy Jackson episodes are filling in the rest of this. And those later Acolyte episodes are way down on the chart here in terms of total viewership. So people weren't sticking with that show. We don't see that same consistent viewership with the title compared to something like Percy Jackson, which has actually performed pretty well, even post its release when it initially got released in December. What becomes really interesting when we talk about Disney Plus is the thing that performs best for them is their animated titles. So right now we're looking at like original streaming animated titles or movie titles, though largely these are going to be animated at the top end of this. But we'll see something like Encanto or Elemental. These have more minutes watched. These are, 90 minutes to 2 hour films that have more minutes watched than any of Disney's big shows this year. So now a lot of that might be the same kid watching Encanto over and over and over and over. But if you can charge someone $10 a month to watch the same movie over and over and over and over, that's a very good business. So that's something that's performing really well for them. They'd like to see an increase in these numbers for the specific TV show data, compared to some of their stalwarts are still really holding up this streamer. You see things like The Mandalorian season 1, which came out in 2019, still performing within the top 10 year to date for Disney. So that's something that's performing really well for them. But they're not seeing that sort of high level, consistent performance from their newer TV shows this year. So we also have this amazing compare tool, and I actually put together a compare already for us. So I put together the Bear season 3 versus the Bear season 2. This is an awesome tool. What it allows me to do is compare titles in the same time frame. So right now you'll see the time frame has changed in the calendar from weeks 1 through 6. I can look all the way up to week 1 through 52. These will not be chart weeks. These will be the week that premiered against the week that it premiered for the other show. So even though these premiered obviously about a year apart, we'll be able to see the data in line with each other. So right now we're looking at daily data for the Bear season 3 on the green line and the Bear season 2 on the blue line. What you'll see here is season 3 had a really big pop for its initial release. So we'll see that bigger release. It's growing in viewership. That's expected based on just how people are talking about the Bear. It's winning all these Emmys. It's getting nominated for more Emmys. So that makes sense that they'd see that bigger pop in viewership. The interesting thing to me as I was looking at this when prepping for this is we see season 3 is starting to decay a little bit faster than season 2 did. They both had the same release strategy. They all did big episode dumps. They dumped all episodes all at once. But you'll see season 3 dips below season 2's line just a little bit, but we'll see it dipping just a little bit below that line as it goes down. And there's been a little bit more mixed criticism around this season. So it's making sense that we're not seeing people stick with the title quite as much as they did with the second season, I mean. So that's something to keep our eye on. It's still a little bit too early. Season 3 just released, so we won't have, I don't have a definitive answer on how that's performing, but this is something that we can keep our eye on in real time in our platform as far as how is this title decaying? Is this something where we're having maybe a softer season where even though we had that big release off the back of everyone loves the second season, we're starting to see a little bit of softening around the title. Now, this is still a huge title. I expect season 4 will also perform really, really well, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on as we're looking at this data. We can also compare, what I'm going to do is actually take out season 3 because we don't have a lot of data on that, but I'm going to bring in the Lincoln Lawyer season 2 to compare titles from different platforms, different release cadences as well. So I'll move this to a weekly level, and then we'll actually expand this out to like the first 26 weeks of data. So Lincoln Lawyer is on Netflix. Netflix has wider distribution than Hulu, so it's expected that we would see a Netflix title have a bigger performance. We see these 2 big spikes for Lincoln Lawyer. That's because Lincoln Lawyer did a split release. So they released 5 episodes, then they had a 3 or 4 week break, and then they released another 5 episodes. Lincoln Lawyer has a really nice story because it releases those first 5, and then it has this nice increase in viewership once it releases those second 5. Now, of course, there's more minutes available when you release 5 more episodes, but they're also keeping people engaged and getting people to re-engage with the show when those new episodes drop. And this is something we're seeing with most of Netflix's most popular titles. They're starting to break those up. You see that with Stranger Things, Bridgerton, Lincoln Lawyer. They're breaking up these seasons so that they can get people to come back to the platform, talk about the title, of all of those pieces of the data. Something that's interesting here is we can also break this down in terms of total minutes watched. So we can see the Lincoln Lawyer season 2 a lot bigger in those first 26 weeks than the Bear season 2. Now, some of this is the Bear has a lot less minutes. That's a half-hour show versus an hour-long show. But what I think is interesting is you can kind of see the disparity between the two here. But you can get a sense when we open this up to 52 weeks, how the Bear holds. So the Bear really kind of increases in that race for viewership. Whereas the Lincoln Lawyer seems to stay a little bit more static. There's still a big increase over 52 weeks, but the Bear is really gaining because the Bear has this really, really, really nice hold. People keep discovering the show. And you can even see that when we go back up to the trends chart, this week 32 data, that's right around the Emmys this year. So when the Bear wins all these Emmys, and this was also, the crazy award season this year where we had the Emmys and the Globes and SAG and all the award shows happening in January. But we see it have this nice bump in the viewership because of those awards. So that just shows how those awards, how that acclaim can help kind of buoy a show and keep its viewership through that period. And that's, that's really important in terms of that decay as well, and making sure people keep coming. If you can keep milking value out of a show that's already on your platform, that's so much better than having to release a new series every single week, which has largely been what Netflix has done. And they have amazing, massive hits, but they release a lot of titles. They're spending a lot of money on titles, and not every one of them pops like the Lincoln Lawyer. So it's something interesting to kind of keep our eye on as we're looking at the streaming landscape. So this gives you a sense of some of the insights that we're able to pull out of the platform. There's a lot to see here, but this is some of the biggest tools, some of the most useful tools within the platform. If you have any other questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll be answering questions for the next few minutes. And then if you have any other more specific questions, our team can definitely be in touch to get more specific with you about those questions and, get specific about the platform. We'd love to hop on a call with you and show you how specifically something that you're interested in is performing. And that's definitely something we're happy to do. Any questions that we had? All right. Awesome. Oh, there's one.
Seth wants to know, how long did it take you to get fluid with the tools, Jimmy?
To get fluid with the tools? Well, so we've been developing this tool since last year, or I've been in the tool since last year. Luminate has been developing the tool for about 2 years. So I'm definitely an expert in the tool, having been in the tool all the time, but I have clients that I've brought into the tool and done training demos with, and they're really able to use the tool in a very sophisticated way within like a week. It really doesn't take that long to get used to using the platform. As you can see, even just me navigating around, it's a really user-friendly platform, and it's something that we're still iterating on. So as we bring on users to the platform, we're able to see what's working, what's not working, what they need there. So even something like this compare tool, we added all these great metadata tools, so we can see all the metadata around it. So you can better understand, okay, this had a big spike in week 32. What does week 32 mean? Okay, that means January. Now I understand that that's when the Emmys were because I know what date that was. So it's a really user-friendly tool. It's very easy to use. And that's feedback we get from really all of our clients, is that the tool is really, really quick to pick up and something that's easy to use.
One more question coming through. How are you seeing the streamers apply Intel? Is it having a big impact on the decision-making yet? I think the recency is a good thing to bring up in terms of how quickly we report. We see that with clients.
Yeah, I think something that's really useful for clients is that we're able to pick up things really, really quickly. So because we have that daily level data, if you have a show that's brand new and it's premiering on a competing streamer or on a streamer that you've licensed a title to, or the week that you've licensed an older title to a different streamer, you can, within that first week, really understand how it's performing. And you can track that performance over the course of months, but you can get a really quick snapshot of how that's performing. You can go talk to someone else within your team about how that's performing. You can send a report to your team about how that title did, and you can make pretty quick decisions around the title. So if you have a title that you sold to a different streamer, you know, before the title's wrapped, you can understand, is this going to be something that's going to get a renewal without even having to talk to your partner necessarily, because you're going to see how it's performing, and more importantly, how it's performing compared to their other titles. If I license a show to one of the streamers, they might tell me the hours watched globally for my show, but what I can't see is how my show compares to every other show on that streamer. And that's the thing that's really important, because it's like, great, my show had 100,000 hours watched, but is that a lot for this kind of show? You won't know unless you have this sort of comparative data. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining, everyone. We really appreciate it. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much.